Donald Trump talks about immigration with certainty, clear lines, clear authority, clear consequences. But inside immigration and customs enforcement, something quieter is happening, something harder to name, something even agents feel. This isn't about policy changes. There haven't been major new laws, no sweeping executive orders rewriting the rulebook overnight. Yet inside ICE, the atmosphere has shifted. Morale feels different. Decisions feel heavier. Routine actions feel more exposed. Agents still report to work. Operations still happen. But the emotional weight of enforcement has changed. Here's the part most Americans never see. Law enforcement doesn't operate on rules alone. It operates on confidence. Confidence that authority will be supported. Confidence that actions will be understood. Confidence that leadership will stand behind decisions when things go wrong. Inside ICE right now, that confidence is thinner than it used to be. Agents are trained to act within the law, but they're also trained to read the environment, and the environment feels charged. Public reaction is stronger. Encounters are more emotional. Routine enforcement draws cameras, crowds, confrontation. This changes behavior, not because agents want it to, but because risk has changed. An action that once felt procedural now feels personal. An arrest that once drew little attention now becomes a moment, filmed, shared, interpreted. And interpretation matters. Inside ICE, officials track more than arrests. They track reaction, public sentiment, community response, political temperature. When those indicators spike, hesitation increases, not refusal, hesitation. This isn't insubordination, it's self-preservation. Agents understand something most debates ignore. Legal authority doesn't guarantee legitimacy. You can be legally correct and still face backlash. You can follow procedure and still become a symbol. That awareness changes how people move, how quickly they act, how cautiously they decide. Trump's rhetoric intensifies this dynamic, not because agents disagree with enforcement, but because language amplifies stakes. When immigration is framed as existential, every interaction feels heavier, every mistake feels larger, every delay feels dangerous. Inside ICE, leadership is aware of this. They don't announce it publicly, but they adjust internally. More review, more consultation, more emphasis on de-escalation. None of this stops enforcement, but it slows it, it complicates it. This creates a quiet tension. Agents feel pressure from above to act decisively. They feel pressure from below to act carefully. Caught between those forces, hesitation grows, and hesitation is contagious. When one office slows, others notice. When one region adjusts posture, others follow. This is how institutional behavior shifts, not through orders, through atmosphere. The public feels the effects without seeing the cause. Delayed actions, inconsistent enforcement, mixed signals. People assume intent. They assume weakness or aggression. Rarely do they see uncertainty. But uncertainty is exactly what's spreading. In the next part, we'll look at how this internal strain affects operations, why leadership is being unusually cautious, and how this moment could reshape immigration enforcement long after headlines move on. Because when the people inside a system start feeling pressure before rules change, that's a sign something deeper is moving. From the outside, immigration enforcement looks the same. Vehicles still move, paperwork still processes, detentions still occur. But inside ICE, the way decisions are made is changing. The difference isn't volume, it's weight. Every decision now carries more consequence than it used to. Agents don't just ask, "Is this legal?" They ask, "How will this be seen?" That question used to matter less. Now it matters constantly. This is because enforcement has become symbolic. Every encounter is interpreted as a statement about policy, about politics, about power. Agents understand this, even if no one says it out loud. And understanding it changes behavior. Here's what that looks like in practice. More hesitation before acting in public-facing situations. More reliance on supervisors for approval. More emphasis on documentation, even for routine actions. None of this violates policy. All of it follows procedure, but it changes speed. Leadership sees the same pattern. They aren't blind to it, but they face a dilemma. Push too hard, and you risk mistakes. Mistakes escalate fast. They trigger backlash. They invite scrutiny. Pull back too far, and enforcement loses credibility. That creates a different kind of pressure, so leadership does what institutions always do under strain. They adjust quietly. Guidance becomes more cautious. Language becomes more precise. Instructions emphasize restraint without saying the word. This doesn't show up in press releases, it shows up in tone, and tone matters. ICE isn't just enforcing law, it's operating inside communities. Communities that are tense, communities that are watching. Agents feel this on the ground, in conversations, in body language, in silence. What used to be routine now feels confrontational, not because of hostility, but because trust is thinner. Trust is the invisible fuel of enforcement. When it drops, friction rises. This is why morale matters, not as a talking point, but as a force. Low morale doesn't mean agents stop caring. It means they care more and worry more. They worry about being exposed, about being misinterpreted, about being unsupported if something goes wrong. That worry slows decisions, not intentionally, naturally. This is how systems behave when legitimacy feels uncertain. They become careful, they become defensive, and defensiveness spreads. Agents talk to each other, across offices, across states. They compare experiences, they notice patterns. When hesitation appears in one place, it becomes acceptable elsewhere. This is how institutional mood shifts, not through commands, through shared understanding. In the next part, we'll examine how this internal strain affects the public, why protests and backlash amplify hesitation, and how this feedback loop may be reshaping immigration enforcement in ways policymakers didn't anticipate. Because when emotion enters enforcement, rules alone no longer determine outcomes. The public feels the effects without seeing the cause. Delayed actions, inconsistent enforcement, mixed signals. People assume intent, they assume weakness or aggression. Rarely do they see uncertainty. But uncertainty is exactly what's spreading. In the next part, we'll look at how this internal strain affects operations, why leadership is being unusually cautious, and how this moment could reshape immigration enforcement long after headlines move on. Because when the people inside a system start feeling pressure before rules change, that's a sign something deeper is moving. When enforcement feels tense, the public reacts. When the public reacts, enforcement feels even tenser. That loop is now shaping how ICE operates, often without anyone naming it. On the ground, agents don't just enforce rules. They manage moments, crowds, phones, emotions. A stop that once ended quietly now unfolds under scrutiny. People film first and ask questions later. Bystanders intervene. Family members panic. This isn't about wrongdoing. It's about visibility. Visibility changes risk, and risk changes behavior. Agents feel that risk immediately. They slow their pace. They seek backup sooner. They defer decisions upward, not because policy demands it, because the environment does. Leadership sees the same signals. They monitor complaints. They track footage. They watch public response carefully. When reaction spikes, guidance shifts, language tightens, approval chains lengthen. Again, no announcements, just adjustment. This is where the feedback loop locks in. Public anger increases scrutiny. Scrutiny increases caution. Caution creates inconsistency. Inconsistency increases anger. Each step reinforces the next. For the public, the system feels arbitrary. Why one action happens here but not there. Why timing varies. Why enforcement looks different day to day. That confusion erodes trust. Trust erosion amplifies confrontation. Inside ICE, this is felt as stress, not ideological stress, operational stress. Agents describe feeling watched from all sides, leadership above, public below, courts in the distance. That pressure reshapes priorities. Avoid escalation, avoid mistakes, avoid moments that spiral. This doesn't end enforcement, but it narrows it. Fewer discretionary actions, more reliance on process, more waiting. Waiting feels safer than acting when legitimacy is uncertain, and legitimacy is the key word. Law gives authority, legitimacy gives acceptance. When legitimacy drops, authority becomes fragile, even if it remains legal. ICE operates in that fragile space right now, not collapsing, but recalibrating. The public senses this recalibration. Even if they can't describe it, they feel delays, they feel unevenness, they feel tension, and they react to that feeling. Which brings us to the most important question of all. What happens when hesitation becomes normal, when caution becomes habit, when institutions learn to protect themselves this way? That's what we'll examine in the final part. Because once systems adapt to emotional pressure, they don't simply reset, they change shape. Because when emotion enters enforcement, rules alone no longer determine outcomes. The public feels the effects without seeing the cause. Delayed actions, inconsistent enforcement, mixed signals. People assume intent. They assume weakness or aggression. Rarely do they see uncertainty. But uncertainty is exactly what's spreading. In the next part, we'll look at how this internal strain affects operations, why leadership is being unusually cautious, and how this moment could reshape immigration enforcement long after headlines move on. Because when the people inside a system start feeling pressure before rules change, that's a sign something deeper is moving. The most important question now isn't whether ICE is still enforcing the law. It is. The question is how enforcement functions once hesitation becomes routine. Because once institutions learn to protect themselves under pressure, that behavior doesn't disappear when the pressure eases. It becomes part of the system. ICE was built to operate with clarity, clear authority, clear procedure, clear backing. When that clarity weakens, even slightly, enforcement doesn't stop. It changes shape. Agents don't rebel. They adapt. They rely more on approval chains. They lean harder on documentation. They avoid discretionary moments that could spiral. From the outside, this looks like inconsistency. From the inside, it feels like survival. This is the long-term effect of enforcement becoming emotionally charged, not paralysis, but caution. Donald Trump's immigration rhetoric accelerates this environment, not because agents disagree with enforcement goals, but because heightened language raises the stakes of every encounter. When every action can become symbolic, mistakes feel unforgivable, and when mistakes feel unforgivable, speed becomes dangerous. So the system slows, quietly. This slowdown doesn't require policy changes. It doesn't require leadership turnover. It persists because the lesson has been learned. That lesson is simple. Legal authority alone isn't enough when legitimacy is fragile. Once agents internalize that lesson, they carry it forward. Even under different administrations, even under calmer rhetoric, that's why this moment matters, not as a scandal, but as a structural shift. Public anger, once it enters enforcement, doesn't stay external. It becomes internalized. It reshapes judgment. It changes pacing, and pacing is power. When enforcement slows unevenly, outcomes vary. When outcomes vary, trust erodes further, and when trust erodes, pressure increases. That cycle doesn't end on its own. Breaking it requires more than new rules. It requires restoring confidence. Confidence that actions will be understood. Confidence that leadership will support decisions. Confidence that enforcement won't become a political flashpoint overnight. Until that confidence returns, ICE, like many institutions, will continue to operate defensively. Not weakly, defensively. This doesn't mean the system is broken. It means it's bracing. And systems that brace for long periods change shape. They become more cautious, more procedural, less willing to move quickly in ambiguous moments. That change affects everyone, agents, communities, the public. This is why the story isn't about one operation, one protest, or one speech. It's about how pressure reshapes institutions from the inside. What we're seeing inside ICE isn't collapse, it's recalibration. And recalibrations tend to last longer than controversies. That's the reality unfolding now, not loudly, not visibly, but steadily. And whether immigration enforcement regains its old rhythm will depend less on force and more on whether legitimacy, trust, and restraint are rebuilt together. Because authority moves fastest when it doesn't have to prove itself, and right now the system is still waiting to feel that confidence again. Because when emotion enters enforcement, rules alone no longer determine outcomes. The public feels the effects without seeing the cause. Delayed actions, inconsistent enforcement, mixed signals. People assume intent. They assume weakness or aggression. Rarely do they see uncertainty. But uncertainty is exactly what's spreading. In the next part, we'll look at how this internal strain affects operations, why leadership is being unusually cautious, and how this moment could reshape immigration enforcement long after headlines move on. Because when the people inside a system start feeling pressure before rules change, that's a sign something deeper is moving. V